While I was watching Rafael Nadal at the Roland Garros final, my boss texted me, "You are fired. Clear out your desk by Monday. Pathetic employees like you don't deserve success," he added. I was sitting next to the CEO of our biggest competitor. I showed him the text and quietly negotiated my new position. Boss got hysterical when. "Pathetic employees like you don't deserve success." That's the text I got while sitting courtside at the French Open, moments before Nadal won the championship. I gave 6 years of my life to that company, and my reward was a 2-line dismissal from a coward. But what my boss didn't know was who happened to be sitting right next to me. If you've ever been blindsided by someone you trusted at work or found strength in the aftermath of betrayal, share your story in the comments. You're not alone in this. My name is Jacob Harrison. I'm 38 years old, and this is the story of how getting fired by text turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to me. It happened in a heartbeat. I was sitting courtside at the French Open final, soaking in the electric atmosphere as Rafael Nadal prepared to serve for the championship. The sun was cutting through the Parisian sky, and the crowd around me buzzed with energy. For a brief moment, everything felt like a reward. I had landed our company's largest European contract just months earlier, a $12 million, 0 cents, consulting deal with Nexera Labs. And this trip was supposed to be my thank you gift, a chance to exhale, to enjoy something for once, to feel like my efforts mattered. Then my phone buzzed. I pulled it from my pocket, expecting a congratulatory message, maybe a check-in from the office. Instead, I stared at a text that made my chest tighten. "Pathetic employees like you don't deserve success." I blinked, confused. The sender was Riley Denton, my boss at Grava Group, the same man who had shaken my hand in front of our entire Chicago office 8 months ago, and called me the future of the company. I barely had time to react before a second message appeared. "You're fired. Clear out your desk by Monday." That was it. No call, no meeting, no context, just 2 blunt sentences that stripped away 6 years of loyalty, results, and sacrifice like they were nothing. Around me, the crowd erupted as Nadal slammed home a point, but I heard none of it. The noise faded, the sun dimmed, and my world narrowed to those 2 texts on my phone screen. For a long moment, I just stared, not blinking. The feeling was more than shock. It was a kind of disbelief that comes when everything you've built is suddenly pulled out from under you. I thought about the nights I'd worked until 2 a.m. London time, the calls I took at dinner while my wife Catherine waited patiently at the table, the 12-country tour I did in 1 quarter just to secure 5 strategic partnerships that tripled our European revenue. I had built Gravura's international operations from scratch. I had sacrificed birthdays, holidays, and sleep, and now I was being discarded over text like I was a contractor who missed a deadline. I swallowed hard, trying to steady myself. That's when the man next to me leaned slightly in my direction. "Everything all right?" he asked, voice low, with a crisp British accent. I turned to look at him and instantly felt the breath catch in my throat. Gerard Bellamy, Chief Executive Officer of Lunar Ventures, Gravura Group's fiercest competitor in the European consulting space. I'd met him once at a conference in Amsterdam. We had exchanged pleasantries, but I knew who he was. Everyone in my industry did. He was respected, calculated, and known for noticing what others missed. I slipped my phone into my pocket. "Just work," I said, forcing a thin smile. He nodded, but I knew he had seen more than I wanted him to. He had definitely noticed my reaction, and I had a sudden sharp sense that this wasn't just a bad moment. It was a pivotal one, a turning point disguised as humiliation. I leaned back in my seat and stared at the clay court in front of me, pretending to focus on the match, but my mind was racing. Riley had just made a monumental mistake. Not just in the way he fired me, but in when and where he chose to do it. I wasn't alone in that stadium. I was sitting beside the one man Riley never wanted near his client list, and right now, that man was watching everything unfold in real time. My firing wasn't the end of the story. It was the start of something much bigger. 6 years earlier, Gravura Group didn't even have a European division. They had ambition, yes, and a few vague plans scribbled on whiteboards in boardrooms back in Chicago. But no clients, no infrastructure, no relationships, just the hope that someone could make it happen. That someone turned out to be me. Riley Denton hired me personally. Back then, he called me a rising star, said he needed someone who could think globally and act locally. I had just come off a major enterprise implementation project with a Fortune 500 company, and had built a reputation for navigating complex cross-border relationships. I knew how to bridge cultural gaps, how to speak with both software engineers and CFOs. I was the translator between vision and execution. Riley promised big things: an international title, future equity, even the possibility of a board seat if things went well, and I believed him. So I took the job, packed up my life, and started flying. The first 2 years were brutal. I was on planes more than I was at home. I learned enough French and German to hold meetings without a translator. I memorized European tax compliance guidelines. I mapped out business customs across 12 countries. I built trust where none had existed before. One client at a time, I opened doors that Gravura never would have reached without someone on the ground who actually understood how to listen. I missed my niece's birthday 3 years in a row. I once took a client call from a hotel stairwell at midnight while Catherine was asleep next door, because the Wi-Fi in the room kept cutting out. I spent more nights in Frankfurt, Amsterdam, and Zurich than I did in my own bed, but it worked. Over 6 years, I signed 43 major clients and grew our European division into a $78 million, 0 cents revenue stream, 37% of Gravura's total business. And Riley? At first, he couldn't have been more supportive. He praised me at company-wide meetings. He flew to London just to shake my hand after the Nexora Labs deal closed. He called me the engine behind Gravura's global growth, but as the division grew, so did his discomfort. Riley didn't like being upstaged. He was the kind of executive who needed to be seen as the smartest man in the room, and my success made him nervous. Slowly, the promises began to evaporate. The equity package? Not the right timing. The board seat? Let's revisit after another fiscal year. The promotion to executive vice president? Still under consideration. Then came the real warning signs. He stopped copying me on internal strategy memos. I noticed fewer invitations to leadership meetings. When I asked about it, he claimed they were streamlining operations. Then, out of nowhere, he hired his nephew, Trevor Denton, as Assistant Director of European Relations. Trevor was 26, fresh out of an MBA program that no one respected, and had never stepped foot outside the United States for business. He spoke no foreign languages and had zero client experience. I found out about his hiring from an internal announcement. No heads up. No discussion. Just welcome, Trevor, to the team. I tried not to overreact. Maybe it was just politics. Maybe Trevor would learn something. But then I discovered Riley had started taking calls from my clients behind my back. When I confronted him, he smiled and said, "I'm just consolidating communications. You've got a lot on your plate." At home, Catherine noticed I was different, quieter, more distracted. "She's setting you up," she said one night while we were cooking dinner. "Men like that don't bring in family unless they're planning to push someone else out." I told her she was reading too much into it, that my work spoke for itself. But looking back now, I realized she saw it before I did. I was being erased, slowly, methodically, and I had no idea just how far it would go. I sat there in stunned silence, my phone still burning a hole in my pocket, as the crowd at Roland Garros roared with applause. Rafael Nadal had just won another point, maybe even the championship, but I barely registered any of it. My thoughts were racing, my chest tight, and my pride shattered. Riley hadn't just fired me. He'd chosen the most public, most humiliating way to do it. From 4,000 miles away over text, while I was sitting at an international event surrounded by people who knew my name, my face, and my professional reputation. It was starting to come into focus now. This wasn't a rash decision. It was a carefully timed execution. Riley had planned this. He knew I would be in Paris. He knew I wouldn't be near my laptop or my team. He wanted to cut me off from my clients, my records, and any ability to respond before word spread through Gravura's ranks. This was no spontaneous firing. It was strategic, and deeply personal. I took a slow breath, trying to process it all. Then I remembered who was sitting next to me. Gerard Bellamy, CEO of Lunar Ventures. Riley's worst nightmare, in the form of a charming, sharp-eyed British executive who had been trying to poach our European clients for the better part of a decade. He was one of the most respected names in our industry. And now, here he was, close enough to see the shift in my posture, close enough to catch the edge in my voice. "I hope I'm not intruding," he said with a calm, measured tone. "But you look like a man who's just received some rather unpleasant news." I hesitated. I could lie, say it was nothing, play it off. But what would be the point? Riley had just fired me with 2 sentences and a sneer. There was no dignity left to protect. Not from Gravura. Not from Riley. And certainly not from someone like Gerard Bellamy, who probably already knew something serious had just unfolded. I nodded once and extended my hand. "Jacob Harrison," I said, "formerly of Gravura Group." Gerard's expression didn't change, but I saw something flicker behind his eyes. Recognition. And interest. "Gerard Bellamy," he said, shaking my hand. "Lunar Ventures." We both already knew that. He leaned slightly toward me. "Formerly, you say?" I pulled out my phone, opened the message from Riley, and let him read it for himself. Gerard read the first message slowly, then the second. His lips pressed together, but he said nothing right away. He read them again. This time, he let out the faintest breath through his nose. "Well," he said, "finally, This is quite an interesting development, and rather fortunate timing depending on how you choose to see it. I looked back toward the court, the applause now distant noise in the background. Something was shifting inside me. The shock hadn't faded, but it was evolving. The hurt was still there, but it was being replaced by something colder. Sharper. Riley thought he had won, that he'd eliminated a threat and installed a puppet. But what he had done, without realizing it, was place me beside the one person who had the power to dismantle everything Riley had tried to protect. Gerard's presence wasn't just a coincidence. It was an opportunity. The clients I had brought in, the ones Riley thought he could keep by plugging in his clueless nephew, those relationships were built on trust, on time, on effort, on shared success. Riley didn't understand that, but Gerard would. I turned back to him. "Would you be open to continuing this conversation over dinner?" I asked. "I know a place not far from the Louvre." Gerard smiled. I was just about to make the same suggestion. The match was over, but the real game had just begun. By Sunday evening, I was back in Chicago. The jet lag hadn't even settled in before I called my attorney. I needed clarity, and I needed it fast. We sat in his office for 2 hours, going through every clause in my contract, dissecting the fine print Riley was surely counting on to trap me. There it was, plain as day. My non-compete agreement only restricted me from working with direct competitors within the Chicago metropolitan area. Lunar Ventures was based in London. That made them international. That made them exempt. That made me free. Monday morning came with gray skies and a chill that cut through my coat as I walked into Graver Group's headquarters for what I knew would be the last time. I didn't stop to chat. I didn't make eye contact. I headed straight to the executive conference room, where Riley, Trevor, and Patricia Wells from HR were already waiting. Riley greeted me with that artificial grin he wore when he was pretending to be in control. "Jacob," he said, "how was Paris?" "Dick and she cogs," I answered, sitting down without missing a beat. Patricia slid a termination packet across the table. It was standard. Severance non-compete language, return of company property, no severance bonus, no thank you note, no acknowledgement of 6 years of sacrifice. Just a thin stack of paperwork. "We've decided to restructure the European division under Trevor's leadership," Riley said, smug and composed. "Your services are no longer required." Trevor didn't say a word, but the smirk on his face was loud enough. He looked proud, like a kid who'd finally been allowed to sit at the grown-up table. I signed the documents without flinching. Riley raised an eyebrow. "I have to admit, I expected more pushback." "No point fighting the inevitable," I said, rising. "I wish you the best with the European market." I walked past Trevor's new desk, my old desk, and didn't look back. But as soon as I stepped outside, I pulled out my phone and called Gerard. "It's time," I said. "Let's move fast." Gerard didn't hesitate. "Send me everything you have. I'll have legal draft the employment agreement by morning." That afternoon I sat down and made a list of every key client I had cultivated over the last 6 years. Klaus Weber, Marie Dubois, the Norwegian pharmaceutical account. Each one had trusted me personally, not just Grevara Group. Each one represented more than a contract. They represented relationships built over time and through results. And then the phone started ringing. Klaus called first, asking why some kid with no experience was now his point of contact. Marie sent me an email late that night. She had been on a call with Trevor and walked away more confused than reassured. A third client left me a voicemail. "Jacob, if you're no longer managing our account, we need to talk soon." By Tuesday, Gerard and I had finalized the offer. Director of American Expansion. 30% salary increase. Equity in the firm. Total control over cross-border client relationships. He asked me one question before I signed. "Is this about revenge?" "No," I said. "It's about making sure Riley never gets to do this to anyone else." By Wednesday morning, the fallout had already begun. Trevor was in over his head, and the clients knew it. Klaus Weber at Christ Christian Global called Gravero's main line asking for me to discuss a contract modification. Patricia Wells, ever dutiful, transferred him to Trevor. What followed was a 15-minute disaster. Klaus later told me Trevor couldn't answer basic questions about the agreement and kept referring to documents that didn't exist. Klaus hung up and called my personal number within the hour. "Jacob," he said, clearly frustrated, "what is happening at your company? This young man knows nothing about our deal." "There have been changes," I told him carefully. "I can't discuss specifics just yet, but I'll be in touch soon." Similar calls poured in that week. Marie Dubois reached out next, her message blunt. "If you are no longer with Gravier Group, we need to discuss our contract immediately." Others followed. Clients were confused, annoyed, and starting to reconsider their commitments. By Thursday, Riley was spiraling. I woke up to 6 missed calls from him and a string of voicemails, each one more desperate than the last. He said there'd been a misunderstanding. that we needed to talk, that he had acted rashly and wanted to fix things. I didn't return a single call. Then Friday morning delivered the first real consequence. Nexer Lab sent a formal letter of termination, citing material changes in account management. $12 million, gone in one stroke. Riley must have nearly choked on his coffee. That evening, Patricia Wells showed up at my apartment. She looked exhausted. Not just tired, but burdened. "I need to talk to you," she said, off the record. I let her in, and she sat on the edge of the couch, hands clasped tightly in front of her. "Did you know about Trevor's hiring before it was announced?" she asked. "No." "Why?" "Because I've been reviewing the onboarding paperwork, and something doesn't add up." Riley backdated Trevor's start date by 3 months, but his first day in the office was 2 weeks ago, and his starting salary was higher than yours ever was. I sat back, trying to make sense of it. I had assumed it was just classic nepotism, but this sounded more calculated. "What else did you find?" I asked. Patricia hesitated, then continued. "Riley's been intercepting your client emails for the past 6 weeks. He created a forwarding rule so that every message you received was copied to him. He told the board you were planning to quit, that you were burned out and looking at competitors." My chest tightened. So that's why Klaus and Marie had sounded distant in those last few weeks. Riley had already begun poisoning the well, laying the groundwork to justify pushing me out. "There's more," she said. "Riley's been negotiating with a consulting firm in Berlin. He's trying to sell the entire European client list. The board doesn't know. He told the Germans that Trevor was already managing those accounts, and that you were unreliable." It all snapped into place. Riley hadn't just fired me to protect his ego. He had a payday in mind. Remove me, plug in Trevor, then cash out by selling the division I built. But there was one flaw in his brilliant scheme. The clients didn't trust Trevor. They trusted me. By Tuesday night, I was on a flight to London. Gerard had moved fast. He always did. By Wednesday morning, I was seated in his corner office overlooking the Thames, finalizing my employment agreement with Lunar Ventures. The terms were better than I could have imagined. Director of American Expansion. A significant equity stake. Full control over international client strategy. Gerard didn't just want me on board, he was giving me the reins. "We've been trying to break into the US market for years," he told me. "But what we lacked wasn't talent. It was relationships. And you bring both." That afternoon, I began reaching out to my former clients. Quietly, personally, and without theatrics. My first call was to Klaus Werber. I told him the truth, that I had joined Lunar Ventures, and would continue to support his technology implementation through our new structure. "This is much better," he said without hesitation. "Lunar Ventures has a strong reputation in Europe. When can we transfer the contract?" "Legal will reach out by next week," I said. "We'll make the transition smooth." Marie Dubois was even more direct. She had been furious after her last call with Trevor, and was actively looking for a reason to terminate Gravor's agreement. "Finally, someone who understands our business," she said. "Send me the transfer documents immediately." The Norwegian pharmaceutical company was cautious, but intrigued. They agreed to an in-person meeting, and hinted they were reconsidering the $12 million, 0 cents deal Riley thought he was about to sell to the German firm. I knew that one would take a bit longer, but it was winnable. By Friday, I had secured formal commitments from 6 former Gravor clients, contracts representing a total of $42 million, 0 cents in active revenue. 3 more had scheduled meetings to discuss their transitions. I didn't need to convince anyone. They were already disillusioned with Gravor's leadership, and most were relieved to know I had landed somewhere reputable. Meanwhile, Patricia kept sending over internal documentation, email logs, timestamps, backdated hiring records, and even drafts of Riley's deal memos with the German firm. It was more than enough to show a pattern of misrepresentation and calculated deception. By the end of the week, the German consulting firm began pulling out. They had been on the verge of acquiring what they thought was a well-run, stable European division. But the red flags had become impossible to ignore. No consistent client contact. Sudden loss of major accounts. Internal HR leaks. The risk was too high. The deal began to crumble. Back at Gravor, chaos took hold. Trevor, completely overwhelmed and facing daily client blowback, quit abruptly. No notice. Just an email to Riley and HR saying the pressure had become unsustainable. He vanished from the company directory by Monday. Riley, who had spent the past few months building this house of cards, now found himself alone holding the pieces. The board demanded explanations. Where had the revenue gone? Why were so many contracts falling through? Why hadn't they been informed of the Berlin sale attempt? Each question pointed directly back to Riley. And the clients? They were no longer answering Gravor's calls. They were calling me. 3 weeks after Riley fired me in Paris, the final blow landed. Gerard called me into his office on a rainy Thursday afternoon. He didn't smile, but there was a quiet satisfaction in his voice. Gravor's board just voted Riley out as regional director, he said. Apparently losing $87 million in contracted revenue in less than a month is considered a fireable offense. I didn't say anything at first. There was no gloating. Just a deep, grounding sense of finality. Riley had orchestrated everything. My firing, the backdoor sale, the public humiliation. And now he was the one out of a job. Fired, not by text, but by a board of directors who finally saw the truth. There's more, Gerard added. Trevor's been telling people you sabotaged the European division out of spite. Some of your former colleagues are asking questions. I figured they'd try to spin it, I said. Let me guess, they're claiming I stole clients illegally. Exactly, he replied. But they didn't count on Patricia. Patricia Wells, who had once handed me my termination packet, had been documenting everything. Email forwards, backdated records, internal memos about the Berlin sale. She was prepared to testify that Riley had engineered my removal months in advance. Her record showed that the sabotage came from within, and it had a name and a timestamp attached to every move. She joined Lunar Ventures a week later as European Operations Manager. The impact was immediate. Klaus referred us to 2 companies in Munich. Marie Dubois connected us with a cybersecurity firm in Lyon. And the Norwegian pharmaceutical contract? It expanded, twice. Their sister company in Oslo signed a 3-year deal, adding $15 million to our books. 6 months later, Lunar Ventures had opened new offices in Boston and Seattle. We landed 14 American clients in 4 months. Clients who had been previously unreachable, until I bridged the cultural and operational gap between our London base and U.S. market needs. Catherine moved to London in the spring. We bought a house in Hampstead, something with character and light, and started talking seriously about children. For the first time in years, I wasn't chasing someone else's dream. I was building something real, with people who valued partnership over politics. When the French Open returned in June, Gerard handed me another ticket. This time, I watched Nadal's victory from the corporate suite Lunar Ventures now sponsored. The same stadium. A different seat, a different life. And Riley? Catherine called from Chicago one day, her voice low with surprise. You'll never guess who I saw at the grocery store, she said. Riley? He was bagging groceries near our old apartment. He looked hollow. I didn't laugh. I didn't celebrate. I just stood there in my London office, surrounded by everything he had once tried to take from me, and felt something close to peace. Getting fired in Paris had felt like the end of everything. But it turned out to be the beginning of something better.